darkness of the room was thick, almost tangible. Emma lay still under the weight of the night, the hum of her old ceiling fan the only sound in the otherwise silent house. The moonlight filtered through the half-open curtains, casting faint shadows on the walls. Everything in the room felt familiar, safe even. Or at least, it had always been safe before. But tonight was different. Tonight, something was off. She had been lying there for nearly an hour, the sheets tangled around her legs, her mind drifting between sleep and wakefulness. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was being watched. Every now and then, she would shift slightly, adjusting her position, only to freeze again as a cold shiver crept down her spine. She glanced toward the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway outside was empty. Just the stillness, the silence. It was unsettling. And then it came. A sound. At first, she thought it was the house settling, the creak of old wood or a gust of wind pressing against the windows. But no, it was different. A faint, labored breath, heavy, as though someone or something was struggling to inhale. Emma froze. Her heart skipped a beat, and her breathing hitched in her chest. She strained her ears in the dark, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was soft at first, barely audible over the hum of the fan. But as she lay there trying to calm her racing thoughts, the sound grew louder, more distinct. A slow, rhythmic inhalation, followed by an equally slow exhalation. The kind of breathing someone would make if they were standing right next to her, watching her. She turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning the edges of the room, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no movement, nothing that could explain the noise. Still, the sound continued, filling the room with its disturbing presence. In and out, in and out. It was as though the air itself had become thick with it, suffocating her. Emma pulled the covers up higher, wrapping them tightly around her body, as if the fabric could protect her from whatever was lurking in the dark. Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket so tightly that her knuckles turned white, but the sound was still there, closer now, unmistakable, and it was growing louder with each passing second. She closed her eyes, trying to convince herself that it was just her imagination, that it was the wind, or maybe the house's strange way of creaking in the middle of the night. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. This was something else, something far more sinister. The breathing, once faint, was now unmistakably close. It was as though the person or thing was right there, just beyond the edge of her bed. Emma's pulse quickened, and she dared not move. Her body tensed, her muscles aching, as she fought the urge to jump out of bed and flee. She counted the breaths, trying to keep herself grounded, in and out, in and out. It was a maddening rhythm, as if the entity behind the sound was watching her, waiting for her to react. But she didn't dare. She couldn't. She couldn't give in to fear. Not yet. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. It was hard to tell in the dead of night. The heavy breathing was relentless, a steady pulse in the silence that seemed to amplify the emptiness of the room. It was as if time itself had slowed, every second stretching into an eternity of dread. Emma's thoughts became disjointed, her mind racing in all directions. What was it? Who was it? She dared a glance toward the corner of the room, her eyes narrowing in the dim light. The shadows seemed to shift, flickering like ghosts in the corners of her vision. But when she looked directly at them, they remained still. The air felt colder now, the temperature dropping so suddenly that Emma could see her breath forming tiny clouds in front of her face. It wasn't supposed to be cold. She hadn't opened any windows, and the heat was supposed to be on. Her mind raced to explain it away, but it was no use. The breathing wasn't stopping. It wasn't getting quieter either. Instead, it seemed to be closing in on her, inch by agonizing inch. Her skin crawled, and she shuddered involuntarily. The feeling of being trapped, of being hunted, tightening around her like a vice. The thought of turning on the light crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed it. She didn't want to see whatever was making that sound. She didn't want to acknowledge the presence that was steadily filling the room. She could feel it now, the weight of it, a sinister force that loomed just beyond her field of vision. She knew that if she moved, if she dared to check, she would find something there. And whatever it was, she didn't think she wanted to see it. Not yet. Not until she had no choice. But then, it got worse. The breathing, which had once been steady, now began to change. It was no longer just a sound that filled the room. It was now accompanied by a subtle movement, a shift in the air, as though something was creeping closer. Emma's breath hitched as she felt the bed beneath her shift, as if something heavy was pressing down on the mattress. The sound was now right beside her, almost in her ear. In a panic, she turned her head quickly, scanning the room for the source of the sound. But there was nothing there. No one. Her chest tightened, and she pushed herself up on her elbows, peering around the dim room. The shadows had deepened, stretching further into the corners, but there was nothing unusual. Nothing except the feeling of being watched, of being suffocated by the presence in the room. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to know. She had to see. Slowly, with trembling hands, she pushed the blankets off her body and swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold against her bare feet, the chill seeping up into her skin. She stood there, her body frozen in place, as the breathing continued, now louder than ever. Closer, almost right behind her. She turned slowly, every muscle in her body screaming in protest, and dropped to her knees. With shaking hands, she reached under the bed, her fingers brushing against the cold wood beneath it. She could feel the fabric of the bedspread scraping against her arm as she reached further into the dark space. There was nothing there, just the usual clutter, dust bunnies, an old shoe, forgotten items that had rolled beneath the bed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sound. It wasn't coming from under the bed. It was coming from behind her. The air grew thicker, colder, as Emma turned, her heart hammering in her chest. Her breath came out in shallow gasps, each inhale feeling more like an effort than the last. Her mind was racing, trying to comprehend the horror that was now dawning on her. She was sure she had been hearing the breathing from under the bed, but now it was clear. It was coming from somewhere behind her. A cold chill ran down her spine, as though ice had been poured directly into her veins. She didn't dare turn fully, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. The sound was unmistakable now. Slow, deliberate breaths, each one growing louder, more pronounced. It felt as if someone was right there, standing just behind her, inches away from her trembling back. The room was silent, save for the relentless breathing. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from. The walls around her seemed to close in, pressing down on her, as if the house itself were conspiring against her sanity. The very air felt dense, thick with something unnameable, a feeling of dread, a sense of being utterly, completely alone, despite knowing that she was not. Emma slowly rose from her crouching position, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She had to get away. She had to get out of this room, but her feet wouldn't move. She couldn't bring herself to turn around, not completely. The sound was growing louder still, each breath so close, so undeniably present. It was as if the air around her was vibrating with the force of it, each exhale trembling through the space, reverberating through her very bones. Her mind spun, struggling to make sense of it. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't. She had imagined the breathing under the bed, surely. It was a trick of the mind, a late-night fantasy made real by fear. But this was something else entirely. A gut-wrenching thought wormed its way into her mind, one that she couldn't shake. She had never truly believed in ghosts or things that went bump in the night. But now, with the sound growing louder, more insistent, more desperate, Emma wondered, just for a moment, if there was something in this world that was beyond understanding, something that didn't belong. Her body screamed at her to turn, to look, to face whatever horror lurked behind her, but her limbs refused to obey. Her breath quickened and her chest tightened, as though the air itself had become a barrier. It was as though her very fear had trapped her in place, her body refusing to react in any way except to tremble, to shiver with the cold sweat that was now soaking her skin. The sound continued, relentless and maddening, in and out, each breath coming closer, each exhale carrying with it the unmistakable weight of something heavy and dark. It was as though whatever was behind her had drawn closer, moved right into her space, its presence undeniable. Her mind swirled with every possibility, every terrible thought she could conjure. She tried to rationalize it, to tell herself that it was nothing, just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the sound, the breathing, it was too real. It was impossible to ignore. She slowly, very slowly, turned her head, peering out of the corner of her eye into the darkness behind her. There was nothing there, just the same shadowed corners, the same stillness, the same empty space that she had known for years. No figure stood there, no form moved within the shadows. But the air was different now. It was heavier, thicker, and the breathing, the dreadful, awful breathing, was even closer now. It felt like it was right beside her ear, as though a phantom had leaned in to whisper. She snapped her head forward again, desperate not to look. Her breath caught in her throat, and her heart was pounding so violently in her chest that she thought it might burst. She had to get out. But the room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. It was as if the house itself were conspiring to hold her captive, to keep her here with whatever was lurking in the shadows. Without thinking, she stumbled backward, almost tripping over her own feet. Her hands reached blindly for the bed, grasping at the edge of the mattress for balance. Her pulse was deafening in her ears, and the sound of her own breathing was lost in the background of the horrible, rhythmic inhalations that seemed to fill the room. She was trapped in this room, trapped in her own terror. Her body refused to move, and yet she couldn't stay still either. The anxiety clawed at her, a gnawing, all-consuming force that threatened to tear her apart from the inside. The breathing came again, louder now, too loud, as though whatever was behind her had pressed so close that the very air she breathed was filled with it. The weight of it was unbearable. She couldn't take it. She had to look. She had to know what was behind her. With a strangled sob, Emma turned, her heart in her throat. Her head whipped around, her eyes wide, searching frantically in the shadows. But the room was empty. There was nothing there, just the shadows, deep and oppressive, stretching across the walls like ink stains. Nothing but the familiar, the ordinary, the bed, the dresser, the open closet door, but the air was thick, as though something unspoken lingered in the space, something just out of reach, hidden in the corners of her vision. The breathing, the sound that had haunted her every moment, was gone. It had stopped. For a moment, Emma stood frozen, her heart still racing, her mind reeling. She strained to listen, to hear any sign that whatever had been in the room was still there. But all she could hear was her own ragged breath and the soft whir of the ceiling fan above. She wanted to believe it was over, that the worst had passed, but the stillness in the room felt wrong, unnatural. It was too quiet. The absence of the breathing was even more terrifying than the sound had been. It was as if the air itself had been holding its breath, waiting for something. Emma took a shaky step back, still unsure of what was real and what wasn't. The floor creaked beneath her, and she flinched, her eyes darting to the door, her mind screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. Her feet wouldn't move. Her body wouldn't obey. Then it came again. A breath, faint at first, like a whisper in the dark. But it grew louder, closer, unmistakably right behind her. This time, there was no doubt. It wasn't in her head. It was real. Whatever it was here, and it was behind her. Emma spun around, her eyes wide with terror. But there was no one. Nothing. She was alone. But the breathing kept coming, in and out, steady, steady. The slow, deliberate rhythm filled the room again, thick and heavy. It was all around her now, suffocating, pressing in from all sides. There was no escape, no way out. She had checked under the bed. She had looked into the corners of the room. She had turned around, and still the breathing persisted. It was everywhere. It was all around her, as though it was coming from inside her, or from somewhere deeper, somewhere she couldn't understand. The air was thick with it, heavy with its presence. She felt the weight of it in her chest, the coldness of it on her skin, the suffocating pressure that threatened to crush her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. All she could do was stand there, paralyzed by the horror, by the knowledge that whatever it was not going to stop. The heavy breathing didn't stop. Emma's chest tightened. Her breath caught in her throat as the sound filled her head. It was everywhere, echoing through her skull, surrounding her, pressing in from all sides. It felt as though the room itself had come alive, like the walls were closing in, the shadows creeping closer, whispering her name in that dreadful rhythmic inhale, in and out, in and out. She could feel her body trembling uncontrollably. Her legs buckled and she sank to her knees, unable to bear the crushing weight of the sound. Tears blurred her vision as her fingers dug into the cold floor beneath her, trying to steady herself. But there was no escape. The air had become thick, suffocating. The darkness was more than just the absence of light. It felt like a living thing, consuming everything, filling every inch of the room with its oppressive presence. And still, the breathing continued. Emma's mind raced. She had checked under the bed. She had scanned every corner of the room, looked into the shadows, and turned her head to see if there was anyone behind her. But there was nothing. No figure, no shape, no source. It was as though the very essence of the room had turned against her, as though whatever was making the sound had become one with the space itself. It was no longer just an external presence. It was inside her, part of her. It was her breath now, too. The cold air gripped her like icy fingers, and her skin prickled with a deep, unsettling sensation that made her want to tear herself free from the room, to escape, to run far, far away from whatever this thing was. But she couldn't move. She was frozen, trapped in this invisible web of fear and dread, held prisoner by something unseen, something unnameable. And then, suddenly there was silence. The absence of the breathing was more terrifying than the sound itself. The stillness was deafening, pressing against her ears like a vacuum. Emma's heartbeat thudded loudly in her chest, each beat sounding like a hammer strike echoing through the silence. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something. She sat there, frozen in place, listening, waiting. Her thoughts spiraled out of control as she struggled to make sense of it all. The silence stretched on, unbearable. What was happening? Was it over? Was the thing gone? Her eyes flicked to the bed, her gaze moving slowly across the darkened room. She saw the shadows, the indistinct shapes in the corner of her vision. But still, there was nothing. Nothing that would explain the terror she had felt, the heavy presence that had filled the room. Then, something shifted. A faint sound, a scraping like something dragging along the floor. It was barely perceptible at first, but then it grew louder, clearer. It was coming from the corner, from the darkest part of the room. Emma's eyes snapped to that spot, heart pounding in her chest. It was then that she saw it. A shape, a form that hadn't been there before, or at least hadn't been visible. It was as though it had materialized from the darkness itself. Slowly, it moved. Slowly, deliberately. It was a shadow, but it wasn't quite right. It stretched unnaturally, twisting, distorting as it slithered across the floor. And yet, there was something about it that seemed to draw her in, something that compelled her to keep watching, even though every fiber of her being screamed at her to look away, to run, to do anything but stay still. Her eyes widened in horror as the shape began to rise, as though pulled up by some unseen force. It was tall, tall enough that it towered over her, even as she crouched on the floor. It was formless, yet vaguely human, its outline shifting like smoke in the air. And then, she saw it. A face that was both there and not there. Its features were indistinct, blurry, like a mirage. But the eyes, those eyes were clear and cold, empty and all-consuming. They bore into hers, and in that moment, Emma felt as though her soul were being drawn into those dark pits, lost in their endless depth. The thing moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps, each movement accompanied by a sound like scraping metal, like bones grinding together. Emma couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. Her mouth was dry, her voice lost somewhere deep inside her. A prisoner to the horror unfolding before her, it reached out to her with a hand that was both there and not there, a form that shimmered and warped like a mirage. The touch of it was cold, so cold, colder than the room, colder than the air around her. The fingers, long and thin, brushed against her cheek, and she felt her skin burn where it touched. It was as though the thing was feeding off her fear, draining her of everything she had left. Her body shook uncontrollably, her entire being quaking under the weight of its presence. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her body was paralyzed, frozen by the sheer terror of it all. The thing was here now, right in front of her, so close she could feel its breath on her skin. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the thing stopped. It paused, its empty eyes still fixed on hers, its presence hanging heavy in the air. The silence returned, as oppressive as ever, and Emma felt herself pulled into that stillness, into the terrible calm that had descended upon the room. The shape, the presence, seemed to regard her for a long moment, as if it were considering something. And then, in a movement so fast it almost seemed impossible, the thing darted back into the shadows, vanishing from sight as quickly as it had come. Emma sat there, frozen, staring into the dark corners of the room where it had disappeared, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. Her pulse raced in her throat, her breaths shallow and rapid. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear the fog that had settled over her mind. But the thing was gone, for now at least. There was only silence again, only the stillness. But Emma knew deep down that it wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, whatever it had been, it was still here. It was still in this house. She could feel its presence in the very air around her, lingering in the corners, waiting, watching. She couldn't stay. She couldn't breathe in this house any longer. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to get out, to leave before it returned. With trembling hands, she pulled herself to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. She glanced around the room one last time, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadows seemed to stretch and flicker, their edges moving in the corner of her vision. She didn't know where the thing had gone, but she couldn't wait to find out. Without a second thought, she bolted for the door. The doorknob felt impossibly cold under her fingers, but she twisted it anyway, pulling the door open with frantic desperation. The hallway beyond was empty, dark, and silent, but it didn't matter. She had to leave. She couldn't stay another minute. She rushed down the hallway, her heart still racing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in on her as she passed them, the air thick with the sense that something was watching her. The house, the very building, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a life that was dark, ancient, and alive with some terrible presence. As Emma reached the stairs, she hesitated for just a moment, her hand gripping the banister, her feet hovering above the first step. She looked back one last time, as though expecting to see the shape in the shadows again. But the hallway was empty, silent. She exhaled, the tension in her chest easing just slightly, and then she fled. She ran down the stairs, her feet pounding against the wooden floor, her heart beating in time with the sound of her steps. She didn't stop, not until she reached the front door, not until she was standing outside in the cool night air, the darkness of the night pressing in on her from every side. And when she looked back, when she glanced at the house behind her, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the window at the top of the stairs, a figure stood, the same empty eyes, the same shadowy form, watching, waiting. And Emma knew with a cold certainty that sank deep into her bones that the thing wasn't gone. It was just waiting for her to come back. It always was.